Hello my friends, and welcome back to another tutorial all about, yes, watercolor mountains, but using texture. And I will teach you how to create all these fun different ways to make mountains in dry brush and wet on wet techniques. So getting some Arches cold press watercolor paper and using these gravy watercolor brushes. I will have all of the materials and the paint colors I use in the description below. But let's jump right in and get started with our first mountain. Now I'm using Payne's Gray here, and I didn't do any color mixing or anything like that. I just want to show you the texture. Now you can see that it's a bit watery, and then I take some water and I spread it out. So those areas where the water is thicker will naturally just pool down, and I continue to do that. So now with this video, I decided to keep in every time I pull water and pull paint. So every time you see my brush pull to the right, I am grabbing water. When you see it go to the left, I'm grabbing paint. So you can see that I have added a ton of water, and I shaped my mountain with the water. So when I've dropped the paint in, the paint spreads into the water and makes some really cool techniques. Now with this particular mountain, I decided to focus on the ridges, and the darkest area in this case is those ridges, the part of the mountain that dramatically sticks out. So that's what I did here. Now, if I went back, I'd probably darken those white areas a little bit more, but you know, it's fine. It can be snow, it can be, I don't know, rocks, whatever you decide to do, but it is fun to experiment and just play around with your paints and water to paint ratio. So I am also using a bit of a dry brush technique here, so you can see that those bristles are spreading out and dancing across the page. I watched a Skillshare video recently, and they talked about how dry brushing is like dancing those bristles across the page, and I just thought that was such a brilliant way to describe a dry brush technique, because it's true, especially when you have very textured paper like Arches. Then those bristles are going to be caught by those ridges. So, but anyway, this is what I'm doing here. Just dropping in paint where I want to drop in some paint, spreading it around, as you can see, and leaving some white space. So really not too much to it. And you can darken it as much as you want and keep it light. So it's really up to you. But you can see those different areas of the paper that's white, that was left white because of the dry brush. It really gives a really interesting texture to the mountain that I personally find quite pleasing. These are my favorite way to paint mountains. These are how I always paint mountains. So these techniques that I use here, I always include in my landscapes. Moving on to the second mountain. Now this type of mountain is similar to the ones I did in my previous video. If you haven't watched that one is for absolute beginners. If you've not painted mountains before, you're new to watercolor, then I believe that these ones are a bit easier than the ones I'm doing today. So now I included this one because I did want to show some texture that you can add on wet, and using, of course, these very inexpensive watercolor brushes. So so what I'm doing here is shaping my mountain with a very light wash of some lunar black, and then I'm just dropping it in. And I'm dropping it in different places, moving it around, because it will eventually start to develop some texture the more I add it. Now I am going to layer this mountain a little bit later once it's dry with some green, and that could just emphasize maybe a meadow on part of the mountain, because obviously there are different areas of meadows that you can see on mountains, and that's fun. Or of course you can choose a different color and manipulate it to be whatever you want it to be. But you can see that I am just dropping in some lighter paint in here, and I decided to go a little bit lighter in some areas and darker in some areas to create depth. So that's what I'm doing here, and of course pulling it down. I tend to favor the left for some reason. I always work moving my paintings going towards the left. I don't know why that is, but anyway, it's something that I have to keep in mind because I constantly do it. But you can go ahead and play around, but you can see as I'm building it up, it starts to create a little bit of the texture in the mountains, which is so much fun, and I love texture. Now, I have been doing in my videos questions of the day. It's a fun way for me to get to know my audience and my viewers, and a fun way for you to get to know a little bit more about me. And these questions don't necessarily have anything to do with these paintings. So for today's question, are you a coffee drinker or a tea drinker or neither? Or do you like hot cocoa? I am curious. I feel like these are questions that are always in those fun little about me type of descriptions in social media. Anyway, which one are you? I am a total coffee drinker. I love coffee. I used to be a tea drinker, and then I fell in love with coffee. So I love a very dark and rich coffee, and I do add some cream and sugar. I use a coconut cream, I believe it is. Anyway, I'm lactose intolerant. Fun fact, not that you care. Anyway, all right, so let me know in the comments below which one you are. All right, for the next mountain, using Lunar Black again. Now, I have to say, this is my absolute favorite style of mountain, from color to texture to how I plan it out. So this is a bit more of a mountain range that I'm doing here. Now I am pulling, you can see that I've got a little bit of paint on my brush, and I am just almost sketching in the mountain with my brush, and I'm placing the paint honestly sporadically. I'm not looking at an image. This is from my imagination, but if you have an image, then that might be a nice way to figure out where shadows are, or where you'd want to have it. Some dry brush texture versus a lighter wash, which is what I did at the bottom there. And then of course you can some drop in paint. So anyway, if you hear my heater, it just went on because it's winter. And then I'm adding a bit darker values of pigment and just lightly spreading it. So this is a bit of a longer video, but I thought it was important to really show you the real-time process of these mountains, so you can try to capture them as well, and to show how often I am pulling from paint and water. Now, I am also thinking in mind about maybe where snow would be. I left a bit of a gap there because I wanted to emphasize that there is snow coming down that crevice of that mountain. And I will purposely leave space, white space, to emphasize snow. And of course, that does happen with dry brush, but then of course you can also leave that space. But I just have fun. I don't really focus too much on where I'm going to place things. I just do it as I go, and the end result I think is really cool and lovely, and it's just so much fun. So I really hope you give these styles a try and techniques a try. There are so many different ways that you can paint mountains in watercolor. This is just another fun way. I don't see this way too often, but when I do, I get excited because I love it. But yes, definitely play around and experiment. And I really love these watercolor brushes specifically for mountains. You don't have to, of course, have these brushes, but I do find, for me at least, that these gravy brushes, you can be very hard on them. They're very inexpensive, but I find that because you can be so hard on them that the bristles just bounce back. So I believe you can get a set of 11 for, I think, $20, I want to say, but I always use these gravy brushes for my watercolor mountains when I do this type of style. Now, I did add a bit more of some darker paint. You can see me dabbing it right from my palette without water, and that's because I want the darkest value that I could possibly get and a bit more of that dry brush. So when you take your bristles, of course, and you touch that damp paint, it is going to give you the ability to create those lovely, lovely dry brush strokes. And I just place them wherever I want. You can add more here, you can add less here. It's really up to you. Another thing is you can also just go over the paint with a little bit of water on your brush and just move that paint around if you find that it's too dark or too harsh. You can always do that. And depending on the brush you have, it may end up lifting the paint. I do struggle a little bit using Neptune brushes for this style because they carry so much water, which I love. I do love Neptune brushes, but I tend to not be able to get similar techniques using those brushes. So I don't know, I'm a weird one. I tend to have specific brushes for specific things that I like to paint. Do you? Let me know. Or do you just use one brush for everything? So, you know, maybe that's a good skill to be able to have. I am not there yet. All right, so for this second mountain, I am showing you how to incorporate two different colors into your mountain. Now, I am using brown and black here. Doesn't matter what brown, doesn't matter what black, that this just happens to be the shades. You could use blue here. There are so many watercolor mountains that incorporate purple. You can use purple, you can use blue, you can use green. I mean, it's really up to you. But I really like these very earthy tones, not so much pastel or bright. I like these very rich, earthy, and dark tones. So that's what I tend to always use. Now, I am just randomly placing my black and my brown, and of course leaving some white space and pulling it down with water and doing some dry brushing here. Now, these colors definitely emphasize more of a rocky type of mountain, not too much green in here. Well, there's no green in here. You could add green in here, of course, but I'm not doing that, so. And I'm doing the same thing that I did in the previous mountain. Now, the only difference is that I am creating those crevices in a different direction. So you can see that they're a bit more on the side, and then I kind of work them up. And there are several mountains and rocky style of mountains where either the crevices of the mountain will go from up and then work its way straight down, or you will even see them horizontally and they just kind of go across, and you'll see even snow collect in a line that kind of just cuts the mountain straight in half, or right through the middle. So it's really interesting. So you can definitely play around. So there's no, in my opinion, there's no right or wrong way to paint mountains or rocky ledges, because they're all so different. They all look very different, and you can really just get creative and have so much fun. So I know it looks hard, but as you start to learn your brushes and experiment with water to paint ratio. They are the easiest things you can possibly paint. I swear by that. So if you just have a light hand and just let your brush do its thing, you will have a really beautiful and stunning mountainside. Now, you can keep going with this mountain or this rocky mountain area with different colors, or because it will dry lighter, or you can leave it as is. You can add more water to create some mist. You can remove some areas of paint and create mist going through it. So it's really up to you what you want to do. And sometimes I know that overworking your painting can be oh no, don't do that. But I find that even if you overwork it in mountains, it still turns out fine. I still overwork my paintings and I don't have too much of a problem with it. So if you do end up finding you overwork your painting, I would just not give yourself too much of a hard time. So obviously you don't want to overwork it to where you're ripping your paper, because that's not ideal. But if you tend to overwork your painting and you like the effects that gives, then I say do what you want to do. You know, when it comes to art, just it's important, of course, learn the techniques, but then develop your own style and break the rules and create your own art. So, all right, I am using Mayan blue now, and I decided to have a light wash for a distant mountain, and I'm doing the similar type of style and texture as the gray mountain directly above it. However, I am making the top part of the mountain the darkest and then having more of that white space towards the center and the bottom. Now I am adding in some very, very dark values of paint here, and you'll see that in a moment. And I do that just because why not? It's fun. It's fun. So, but do you see that white space? It's so cool. I love this method. Anyway, if you're afraid of painting mountains, I highly recommend trying this way of painting. And it's just, I think it creates such a cool effect. It's so much fun. I love it. It makes me so happy. You can see that paint is so dark down there, but I think that's really, really nice to add such dramatic and contrasty depths of color. So I think it creates for a stunning piece, and that's the beauty of watercolor. Watercolor is such a fun medium. It's not an easy one. It's really not super easy, but as you let yourself kind of experiment and let the stress and worry of getting things perfect go, then you can just have so much fun and create really cool and interesting pieces. So when I first started painting mountains, I used to worry about spacing and making sure that I had details, and then at some point I thought, forget this, and I started painting this way, and yeah, I just fell in love with it. So I even love the cauliflower effect into mountains. You can see that's kind of what happened right there, and that creates a really cool texture too. So this reminds me a bit of a realistic style of painting when it comes to these textures. So I love it. And if you were to incorporate different colors in here, I think it would be stunning. Okay, so I'm back to that second mountain now, and I have wet the area, and now I'm dropping in some green. Now I'm adding a bit more of a cooler green, and it's the perylene green, and I am just dropping in some light and darker values of that green. And this is just to show maybe there's trees there, or maybe there's, I don't know, a meadow there, and it will just kind of spread and look fairly pretty. So that's another thing that you can do, and you can do that in different areas of the mountain, and you can really make it quite dramatic by adding in even darker values of the same color, which is what I am doing here. And then of course kind of spreading it around, moving it around, but if it's already wet, it will naturally spread on its own. If you find that maybe you've done too much, you can take a paper towel and just dab a little bit away. It's really up to you. Have fun, do some experimentation. And of course, I'm doing a little bit of lifting here, but you will see that I decide to use a paper towel just to blend it in a bit more. If you hear noise in the background, that is my cat. I have 2 cats, and it is early morning, about 20 minutes to 6 a.m. when I'm filming or recording this, and of course they have the zoomies. Another thing that you can do if you want your mountain to be a bit darker and to have soft blends is to wet the areas that you want it to be painted over and add some paint, and it will naturally spread and blend nicely. Now if you do that, of course the paint will dry a little bit lighter because you have watered that paint down. Do you guys have animals? Let me know. Do you have cats? They are quite crazy. And I'm just pulling more of that paint down with some water. But you can see that you can really build up this style of mountain, and you can have that wet on wet wash, and then once it's dried, go over it with a bit more of some wet paint and then some dry brushing techniques and create even more texture, and of course even using a paper towel. So yes, it's really up to you. A lot of fun. Now for this one, I decided to add another mountain in front of it, and I wanted it darker and richer and more dramatic, so that's what I'm doing here. Now the first layer of paint that I'm adding is quite watery. You can see how dark that is. You can see that I am just building it up and making it very dramatic, and of course adding some water and moving it down. And then I'll add another layer of some dark pigment underneath that to really make it dramatic. So it's really up to you here what you want to do here as far as making it really dark and really light. And I am excited that you wanted to watch this video, and hope that you decide to try these techniques as well. And of course, if you want to follow me on Instagram, I am at Jackie Peacock Art, and I would love for you to show me your mountains and share them with me. I would love to connect with you on there. And yeah. But of course, let me know in the comments below if you're getting some value out of this video. Even if you don't paint mountains or don't like to paint mountains, this might be a fun introduction on how you can paint them without worrying too much. And the messier, the better, I think. Art is so subjective, isn't it? And there are all these rules and do's and don'ts, and of course, like I mentioned before, it is important to learn these rules or laws of different ways of painting, but I really believe that the word don't should not be in your artist vocabulary, because it shouldn't be. You should paint how you want to paint and be a rule breaker. But that is it, everyone. I hope you had fun with me today and explored these different type of ways of painting mountains. And let me know if you got some value out of this video, and be sure to like and subscribe. I would appreciate it. And until next time, my friends, I will see you in my next video. Bye, guys.